Hey everyone, thanks for joining tonight. And sorry we're 2 minutes late, just had a couple of last minute technical difficulties. We're just gonna give everyone a couple minutes to join and then we'll get started. Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Sorry we got a couple minute late start just due to some technical snags this evening, but thank you for joining. We're just gonna give it 1 or 2 more minutes to let people come into the room. In the meantime, I'll just let you know there's a 20-second or so lag between me talking and actually coming to you. We want to hear from you tonight, so as we're going, please drop any questions and comments into the chat, and then we'll take a couple breaks as we go to respond. But yeah, just be conscious there's a little delay, so get your questions in early. All right, we'll give it like 30 more seconds, and then we'll get going. Okay, welcome Mountain Friends. Thank you for tuning in this evening. I think people will continue filtering in, so I'm just gonna get started. If there's anyone you think who might be interested in tuning in, just please drop people a text right now. The more people we get on these sessions and the more word we get out, the better. But if people can't join live, don't worry, all these sessions get recorded and posted both to Facebook and YouTube, so you can always refer back whenever you have a sec. So let's just get into it. I've got a little presentation I'm going to run through. Again, please drop questions and comments in the chat as we go. I'll take a couple breaks to get through to stuff. So I wanted to start off by actually talking about what a county supervisor does, because I'm really conscious it's not a household name, it's not a sexy position on the ballot. I myself didn't even know what a county supervisor was until about a year ago when I got involved in the snowstorms. So I thought it was worth taking a few minutes just to explain what they actually do. So we kind of think of this in four main buckets: approving the budget, allocating resources, approving legislation, and securing investment. So just a quick note on each of those. So the person that sits in this seat needs to have financial literacy. This county has about a $10 billion budget. Annually, that's a lot of money. And allocating resources. So under the county sit dozens of different departments, and they each operate a little bit differently. So the county supervisor doesn't necessarily need specialist knowledge in each one of those departments, but needs to know how to allocate resources between them. Approving legislation. So the county doesn't actually create too much of its own legislation. A lot of what happens is the county is responsible for implementing legislation that gets passed down from the state of California or from the federal government. But as we'll talk about with some specific examples, there's a huge amount of latitude in implementing that legislation. So one important aspect here is that is done in a way that works for all residents in the county, and certainly what works for someone up here in the mountains might not work for someone in the desert. It's also important in this role that you respond to stuff quickly, because this is a pretty fast-paced environment. And lastly, securing investment. I'll talk later, but as a county, we get a huge percentage of our budget through reimbursements from the state of California and the federal government. So the person sitting in the seat needs to know how to lobby for investment. So that's the quick whistle-stop tour of the high-level roles and responsibilities. Now I want to tell you a bit more about me and my professional background, because I'm conscious you might even know me already from all of the work I did last winter in the snowstorms. But what you might not know is my professional background and why I think I'm actually quite suited to this role. So I've got two phases to my career, a phase I call big finance and then small business. So most of my professional career I spent working in corporate finance. And the version of that it was for me was I was a professional investor. So I worked for a big company, and it was my job to go out and raise money from investors for my company. And if you're a person who's ever had a public pension fund from the likes of SB Sarah, LA Sarah, CalPERS, if you know what I'm talking about, then you'll know those names. Those are the kind of people that we would manage money for. So what we'd do is we'd raise money from managers like that and all kinds of institutional investors. We'd put that in a company pot of money and then invest that into companies across all kinds of industries. So I was what was called a generalist, which meant I didn't have one sector that I focused on. I looked at companies across a whole range of sectors. I tried to make a list the other day. I got up to over 40 and I stopped counting. And I think the reason that's relevant, if I think about this county and the dozens of departments that operate within it, they each do something a little bit different. And the experience I bring investing money across all those different sectors and types of companies is really pretty helpful. And then I decided I didn't want to do corporate work for my entire career. So I don't know, probably 5 years ago or so, I left that job. I started a couple small businesses. One was an online health and fitness startup. The other was a topical skincare brand. And really through those experiences, I learned a couple things. One, I learned just how hard it is to be a small business owner. And then two, I learned both through those experiences and talking to residents here, how hard it is to be a small business owner in San Bernardino County. And a lot of those experiences really form a lot of the views I have on what I think we need to be doing as a county and how I think we need to make small business easier here. I think we have a question.
Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Mark. I'm Graham's husband and campaign manager. I'm running things behind the scenes, which is why I'm just a disembodied voice right now. But yes, we have a lot of questions.
Okay.
And I know we were going to get onto some local issues later on, but since the questions are here already, I figured why not
let's
dive in. So this question is from Sarah. She says, how can we get better representation for the unincorporated areas?
That's a great question. It sounds like I wrote it myself. So I, as a resident of unincorporated San Bernardino, I think it's really important we have representation on the Board of Supervisors. So right now, the entire board and all the people running the various races right now live in incorporated parts of San Bernardino. And I'll talk later on, but if you don't know what the District 3 are, I think it's really too big to effectively manage as one chunk. It's almost 10,000 square miles, and the geographies are so diverse. But I think the thing I'm trying to bring to the table is some empathy for what it's like to be a resident in unincorporated San Bernardino. I know how hard it is to make improvements to your house. I know how hard it is to open a small business, and I know it's back. So a huge part of the reason for my personal reason for running for this seat, all of us in unincorporated San Bernardino County. Obviously, we're talking about the mountains today, but a lot of desert residents feel the same way. I think we all need some better representation on the board.
Do you also want to talk about Macs?
Oh, yeah. So it's maybe not as front of mind for residents up here in the mountains, given we've got a couple of MAC committees, at least on our side of the mountains near Lake Arrowhead and Crestline.
What's a MAC?
Good point. What's a MAC? A MAC is called a Municipal Advisory Committee. And it's really meant to be a conduit through which the Board of Supervisors and local residents in various parts of the district. So we have some representations, but when you talk to residents in the desert, you find that a lot of the MAC committees that used to exist. So a big part of the platform for me is reinstituting as many of those as possible so we can get really good representation from all parts of the district.
Okay. We have a comment from Rochelle who says, thank you for using technology to reach out. This is something that has been very important to us because, as Graham mentioned, this district is square miles, and as much as we would love to meet everybody in person, it's incredibly difficult because some of the areas that we need to reach out to are like a 4 or 5 hour drive from here. So we've been trying to do as much as we can to meet as many people as we can. We have a question here that says, what can and will you do to ensure future warehouse jobs will be unionized and high paying?
If you spend any time on my website or on social media, I've started to talk about this a lot, and actually I'm glad you asked because I've got a 3 or 4 minute YouTube video that's going to go up on this in the next couple. I talk a lot about how I think our reliance on transport and logistics is going to be a problem for us here in San Bernardino County. And what I mean when I say that is, I don't know if all of us are familiar with that, not putting all our eggs in one basket. And that's kind of what San Bernardino County has done with our economy right now. Right now, transport and logistics is far and away the single biggest employment sector in San Bernardino. It's over 150,000 jobs. And to your point, a lot of them right now are not unionized, and they're also first in line to get replaced by robots. Amazon, I feel like every couple months is releasing a new warehouse robot, and they claim that it's not going to take warehouse jobs, but I'm not sure I totally believe that. So I actually attended a picket line, I think it was last Saturday or Sunday at one of the warehouses in Redlands. And this was a picket on behalf of Teamsters, one of the unions here, to try to allow Amazon employees to unionize, because a lot of them have tried to, and there's been a whole lot of pushback. So I'm committed to finding whatever ways I can to help those employees or allow those employees to unionize. And the other thing I'm really focused on, if I'm thinking about what my agenda is in the supervisor seat, I want to find ways to help diversify our economy. Because I think the problem we're going to face is if a lot of these warehouse jobs, if our economy starts to take a dive, then we've got such on this one sector. It's going to mean our economies, we're going to be earning tax revenue, we're going to have to pay out a lot in terms of unemployment benefits, and then we're going to be going to the state of California and begging for more resources. So again, I talk about this a little bit in some online content, but one thing I'd really like to explore here is a big investment in renewable energy. The land that's been disturbed already, like warehouse roofs, they're actually supposed to be required to have installations on them right now. Most of them don't. And one of the reasons I'm focused on this is these jobs are well paying, they're often unionized, and I think in terms of our long-term demand for energy, that's always going to continue to grow. For things like fossil fuels is going to peak at some point, but we're always going to need more energy. And if we can invest smartly in renewable energy across this county, we're ourselves in a really good position. So I know it's a long-winded answer. I actually have a lot to say about this. So if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, pass those videos to anyone who you think might be interested, because I do talk about this a lot.
Kirk made the suggestion that we get in contact with the Teamsters, Local 1932. Thank you for the suggestion, Kirk. We actually are in contact with them. We have an interview with their political activity.
I believe it's Thursday.
Thursday this week. So thank you for that suggestion. So Kirk also made a comment. He says, I'm here for housing talk. So maybe we could talk about affordable housing briefly.
Yeah. So I have some countywide priorities a bit later on where I really talk about how things like homelessness, affordable housing, crime are all kind of related. One thing I think we can do a better job of as San Bernardino County is making better use of the funding that both we receive and also that we have access to. So I don't know if you would have remembered the headline, but this was, I don't know, maybe 9 months ago or so. The county actually had to return about $4 or $5 million of federal homeless funding because it wasn't spent properly. And just either last week or the week before, San Bernardino County was named as a defendant in a trial alleging misallocation or misuse of homelessness funds. I think there's a lot to unpack because part of this is financial, part of it is making sure we have the money we need to do the work we need to. And then some of it is making sure that we create an environment that allows affordable housing to be built. Now, I don't have a magic bullet answer to that, but things on my mind are, community land trusts, fast track approvals, just making sure we for affordable housing as much as we can. Because if you are joining from the mountain communities, you know that dealing with San Bernardino County for any kind of building permit is not an easy process. It's certainly not quick. And if we're going to build affordable housing effectively, I think we need a lot of that. We can do it well.
We have a question here that says, how are MAC committee members selected? That is a very interesting question.
That is an interesting question. Right now, they are selected by the Board of Supervisors members, and I'm not here to talk about any committee members, but I do think one opportunity with MAC committees is to make them a bit more representative of the community. Now, I don't know if it is to do that. I don't know if it really makes sense or is even possible to have a popular vote, but I really want to find ways to make those MAC committees a bit more accessible, a bit more representative of the communities that they represent. Because certainly as a mountain resident, I mean, I'm obviously very politically involved now running for this office, but before that was the case, I couldn't tell you what a MAC committee was, couldn't tell you who was on them. So I think there's an opportunity to make them a little bit more public, a bit more engaging, and a bit more useful.
And we have a question for Becky. Sorry, I was just trying to find it. We found 70 homeless individuals in the mountain area during the point-in-time count last week. What would be your approach to solving the homelessness problem on the mountains?
Interesting. I think solving homelessness on the mountains is very similar to solving it in other parts of the district. And actually, I wasn't even aware we had that many homeless people up here in the mountains, and I'm bummed to hear that. I think that comes back to, again, lobbying the state of California, lobbying the federal government for more resources, and then making sure we're spending the money we have for homelessness more. And one reason I say that is last year, the County of San Bernardino allocated a big pot of money. It was upwards of $70 million to spend on homelessness. They started spending money, homelessness continued to increase, and it was only a few months ago they finally set up a subcommittee to start understanding the root causes of homelessness. And I think the main point is really important here, because I don't even think it's enough to study a committee to look at the root causes of homelessness overall. Because we live in such a specific geography here, because the desert is so specific, because our urban areas are so unique, I think we need to make sure we're understanding the root causes in all these places and work to implement in each one of our geographies across District 3. I can't tell you right now exactly what those are, but what I can do is I'll put in the work to figure out what they are and make sure we're spending the money we have the best we possibly can.
Okay, I think that's it now. So why don't we carry on talking to the presentation?
So back to the presentation. I'll just I'll scoot through this really quickly here. So you know a little bit about my professional background. So I want to relate that back to the role of supervisor and give you a feel for why I think I'm actually pretty qualified for this job. So one, approving the budget. I mean, in my professional career, I raised and invested $10 billion, and the last firm I worked for manages about $400 billion. So in terms of being able to deal with the numbers on the size and scale of the county's budget, that's something I can do pretty well. Allocating resources is kind of like how I mentioned I invested money across a bunch of different companies. One thing I would consider to be a core specialty or competency of mine is looking across a bunch of different companies or a bunch of different county departments, figuring out what makes them work and figuring out what resources they need to make them work better. On legislation, I think the point here is being able to respond to stuff quickly, being able to do the research and provide real advice and perspective and challenge, and make sure that what we're getting down from the state of California is implemented in a way that works for residents across this district. We've seen supervisors complain they haven't had enough time to review legislation before they've had to vote on it. I'm certainly used to working in a really fast-paced environment, and I know I can bring a bit more professionalism to this role. And again, I would refer you back to YouTube, to social media videos where I do some deep dives on issues, really to give you a feel for how I think and what kind of analytical mind I can bring to this role. And last but certainly not least is securing investment. So we get about 1/3 of our county's budget through reimbursements from the state and the federal government. The person sitting in this seat needs to know how to sell San Bernardino County as an investment opportunity effectively, and lobby to get as much money as we possibly can. So professionally raising money is something I did for about 12 years. So this is something I can do well.
We do have one good question from Susie. She asks, is this a nonpartisan position?
I'm glad you asked that. It is a nonpartisan position. So the way I think about this is local government is about delivering better local services. So things like up here in the mountains, making sure our roads are both plowed in winter and pothole free when there's no snow on them. Making sure our trash gets collected, just making sure all of our basic services tick over properly. So on that basis, the seat is nonpartisan. I actually have a whole discussion about my own political affiliation and background. And again, that's online. It's on YouTube. It's on Instagram. So watch out if you have a moment. I mean, what I'll tell you just really quickly is, because I know everyone just wants to know if you're a Democrat or Republican. And the short answer is, I am a Democrat. I mean, I'm an openly gay guy. So national level anyway, I kind of have to pick a home, and the Democrats are the just because they are the party that's not trying to take away my rights. But in terms of some real conservative principles, one thing I'm really trying to do in this role is some financial discipline, financial rigor. This is something I really don't think we're seeing enough of from our current county leadership, which is overwhelmingly Republican. So even though I am, yes, a registered Democrat, I'm actually hoping to bring some real, genuine Republican principles to the as well. And I think what's super important here is we don't have to get into the discussion around divisive national issues. This is, how do we raise as much money as possible from the state of California, from the federal government, and how do we spend that as effectively as possible across all these county departments to make life as good as possible for all of us. So hope that answers your question, but again, there's a whole YouTube video addressing this very topic because a lot of people ask. Okay, so just a really quick overview of the district that we sit in. Now, it's easy to forget how big this place can be sometimes. So San Bernardino County is already the biggest county in the entire country. It's 20,000 square miles, about the size of West Virginia. And it's split into 5 districts. Now, 2 of them, Districts 1 and District 3, are huge. They're about 10,000 square miles each and take up about half the geography of the total county. The other 3 are the ones down the mountain in places like San Bernardino, Rancho Cucamonga, where there's a lot of population density. So they've all got about 410,000 people in them. But District 3 is really complicated because we've got mountains up here, and maybe you're joining from Big Bear. What works for you in Big Bear doesn't necessarily work for us here in Sky Forest. And the desert communities are very much the same. No one place here is created equally. So I think it's a really difficult district to manage just because it's so big and it's so diverse. Yeah, we've got just a couple quick stats here, which I've kind of already talked about. But yeah, the point is District 3 is a big challenge, and the person sitting in the seat has to be up for it. And I think I certainly am. Okay, another question?
Yes, so we have a question from Vadim, who says, you mentioned that you have managed multi-billion-dollar investments in your current job. Can you say how the investments that you've managed have performed? I think that's a great question. Lots of different ways you can answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's worth noting I'm not working that one job anymore. So I worked for a big asset manager. So it's called Ares Management. I'm trying to be fully upfront about what I used to do. So I joined in 2008, I want to say. And at that point, the firm managed $20 billion. When I left in 2017, 2018, we managed about $200 billion, and today it manages $400 billion. So has continued to grow and is really one of California's now most renowned asset managers. And in terms of how those investments went while I was there, a big part of this job for me wasn't just investing money on day one. These were all really private investments, and you get really involved in the operations of companies. And I think that's really important here, because this job is about working with all these county departments, figuring out what makes them tick, and figuring out what they need to do their job better. So in my last job, I would sit on company boards. I'd provide advice, provide input on how to make things work better for everyone. And through that process, made a bunch of money for all of our investors, all of our stakeholders. Again, if you are a recipient of a public pension fund, a lot of that work was for you. And in general, has gone incredibly well.
Can you explain very briefly why your company chose to invest in each of those companies? Was it because they needed money? Were they struggling? Were they looking to grow? Like, what was the reason for that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Usually the reason for investment was these were companies that were looking to grow. All right, so it wasn't providing any kind of shark loan, rescue capital, that kind of thing. It was a company would come to us and say, we have this opportunity we want to explore, and we need some help to do it. So we would provide the financing, we'd get really involved, provide advice, and in general, I mean, as a whole funds, things in general had gone incredibly well. So what in this space, what happens is if you don't do well, you don't continue raising investment funds. And when I was there, we raised 4 or 5, and they've continued on since. So the track record is really strong.
The reason I ask that is because we have another question which says, the county has a forensic lab attached to the sheriff's department. The lab has significant backlogs, frequently gets overlooked. Do you have any thoughts on how to get the county on board to fund the lab adequately? And this is kind of what I was thinking, a direct comparison to companies coming to you in your old job saying, we need money so that we can expand, do more things, better, be more efficient. And it sounds very similar to what a county department might come to the board of supervisors for.
So one thing I want you to know is I do actually spend a decent amount of time with our county's budget, and I think I'm probably the only candidate that really has the professional background to be able to do that well. And one thing that I find, even just looking through this high level, is I certainly through my professional background training, I have a brain that's trained to look for anomalies and discrepancies, and certainly there are a few of those. By the way, sorry, our backup generator is doing its weekly test for winter. So if you're getting some noise, that's what that is. It'll go down in a second. So what was I saying? Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time on the company's budget. I have a brain for anomalies and discrepancies. I found plenty of areas in which, if I'm sitting in this seat, I would go to heads and say, hey, can you tell me about this? This doesn't necessarily look right. And then coupled with that, there are a lot of areas where I think our county is wasting money and can stop the waste and start spending on other stuff. So things I mean when I say that, it's even pretty upfront in the county's budget. They talk about spending a few $1 million on an economic study to evaluate whether some of the revenue from STR should stay in local communities. This is something I've been talking about for a while and something I really want to do. I don't think we need to spend $3 million to figure out whether that's correct or not. They also just spent a bunch of money on the STR report talking about whether we think STRs are having an impact on the availability of long-term rental housing. I think we have a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that's probably the case. And one thing I've seen this county do is really try to pass off responsibilities to others by hiring consultants and getting someone else to give an opinion. So I think we have a lot of opportunity and save some money. And the whole point of that is to then be able to go to departments like forensics and say, okay, we found, $10 million in this county budget. Because, by the way, in a $10 billion budget, can you find $10 million? Can you find $50 million of waste to get allocated somewhere else? Absolutely.
Yeah, not to sound dumb, but $10 million of a $10 billion budget is 1/1000th, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay,
that sounds right.
That sounds about right. Cool.
Okay, any Any other questions?
Not right now, no.
Okay.
Plow on through.
Okay, so now I wanted to talk more about some of my county-wide priorities, and then I'll talk about some local priorities here in the mountains. And again, I'm getting a...
Sorry. No, I just wanted to mention to everybody that it looks like the lag is a little bit longer tonight. So please just kind of keep throwing your questions and comments into the chat, and we will get to them obviously as soon as we see them.
Yeah, and if there are any technical issues you're experiencing, please let us know in the chat, and we'll see what we can do about it on our end. So in terms of my county-wide priorities, like one thing I say is I want to be really upfront and honest with you about the agenda that I have, because I do have an agenda, and the thing I'm telling people is if this agenda is something that you're interested in, then I really want you to consider voting for me. But what I don't want to happen is for me to get elected to this seat and for you to be surprised in any way. I want to be really honest and transparent about exactly what I want to do. So, at a county level, one thing, I've already touched on this, financial responsibility. We really need more of this in this county. I talked about the homeless funding we had to return. This county is getting sued left, right, and center. I don't know if you would have seen the news about the former county chief executive officer. He was allowed to resign, but really was fired because he was having inappropriate relationships, bullying people, in particular female department heads. We've talked to dozens of county employees who have said so many department heads have left and taken their teams with them. So there's a huge mess to clean up. And I think part of the reason this happened is because we don't have any supervisors who have a financial eye and can spot this stuff before it's coming. It was already too late by the time people found out about it, and now it's a huge mess to clean up. I touched on this already. I think we got to diversify our economy. We're so focused on transport and logistics right now, and I will post this video either tomorrow or Thursday and give you a deeper dive on why I think we're setting ourselves up for failure here. But I do think we have this big area of exposure, and one of the things I'm focused on is trying to find some other industries to come in and help balance out our economy. And I think I'm credibly the person running for this seat who could do that the best, because I've got a big professional network, both through the firm I used to work for and all the people I used to work with in my last job, and like credibly through that network, that's access to trillions of dollars of companies. So in terms of being able to go and pitch people on why I think they should come move to San Bernardino to set up shop, that's something I can do pretty well. I think our relationship with the state of California in particular is at an all-time low. I talk a lot about how I think tactics like proposing secession on our last ballot in 2022 are a dumb idea to try to get us more resources. I'm way more focused on finding productive ways to engage with the state of California, finding interesting opportunities to really get more resources from the state back to San Bernardino County. And last but certainly not least is restoring trust with residents. I think if you're like me and you're in the mountain communities, if you lived through last winter, I think a lot of the trust between residents and local government really got broken down. We were obviously stuck in our houses. We weren't hearing anything for days on end. And I think especially being in an unincorporated part of San Bernardino County, it's really easy to feel like the government just doesn't have your back. And I'm not even talking about the big stuff like last winter. I'm talking about trying to open businesses. I'm talking about trying to improve your house. This is stuff this is stuff our local government makes, I think, way, way harder than it should. Another thing we've noticed in dealing with the county is oftentimes we have this isn't my problem kind of attitude. And sometimes they're technically correct. So a lot of times this comes up in discussions about road maintenance and what are county roads versus state maintained roads. But I think the most important thing that anyone in this position can do can be to work with those state agencies, facilitate a relationship, and make sure that the end customer, i.e. the resident of the county, is getting the service they deserve. I mean, at the end of the day, the role of the government should be to do its job well, take care of all of us residents, and then get out of your way and let you do your thing. So that's what I want to do. Right.
Okay.
Any questions before we carry on?
We do, but if you want to move to the next slide, the questions we have are related to local issues, which I know we're going to talk about next. So
Okay.
let me just change the camera angle. So we have another question from Vadim, who says, currently, if you host an STR, and as a host, all you can do is communicate the rules to your guests. But if the guests violate those rules, the host gets fined up to $5,000. This doesn't seem fair. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think with STRs, we have an opportunity to look at places that have gotten a grip on their STR situation and like manage it really well. I talk about examples like Palm Springs as a for instance, because they've had STR issues in the past and they've broadly worked through all of them. I think part of this comes down to having enough code enforcement in each of the geographies where we have STRs to make sure that, you know, if there's a minor problem, it can get reported, it can get resolved. I mean, I do think at some point we got what is the responsibility STR owner versus what is the responsibility of the guest, because if there are problem STRs where, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in a row guests aren't abiding by the rules, then maybe there's something in terms of the way the rules are administered that's just not working. So I think it's trying to find that sweet spot in the middle where you've got a method for people to call code enforcement if they're having problems. I mean, hopefully, like a good neighbor, the first port of call is for the next door neighbor to go over. Can you calm down? And if they don't, then they should be allowed to call code enforcement and for that all to escalate. I mean, if what you're saying is right and it's a first thing, nothing that bad, and it's a $5,000 fine, that does seem kind of crazy to me.
This touches on an issue that we've talked about a little bit in terms of we've talked about how the county shouldn't put legislation in place that punishes STR owners that are trying to because Correct. Once you do that, then you sort of remove any kind of incentive to do all of the things that Vadim mentioned, like making sure guests know the rules.
Exactly. And, you know, I'm not here to call anyone out, but, you know, certainly one thing that we found is STR owners who are local to the mountain or whatever community they live in are usually pretty responsible. So I think a lot of the STR problems we face here are when you have an owner that doesn't necessarily live in the county, is disconnected, doesn't know their neighbors, because we have so many STRs who say, if we have a problem, my neighbor will call, then they won't call code enforcement, they'll call me so I can deal with it. Right. So I think part of this comes down to just the responsibility of the STR owner. Make sure you know your neighbors and just make sure you do as good a job as you possibly can so that people will call you first before they call the sheriff or code enforcement.
I think one other point to mention is your proposal the county generates from short-term rental properties actually are, because I think what it would do is beef up the finances of code enforcement so that the county doesn't have to try and claw back those costs with some of these fines that are inappropriate.
Exactly. So right now, if you don't know what happens with STR revenue and I'm talking both the annual fees and the TOT occupancy tax, that all goes to the county's fund, which basically means it goes into a giant pot and then, as I've been talking about, gets allocated to the county. I am with activities like this, I'm a huge proponent of keeping STR revenue in the neighborhoods that generate them, because ultimately these are, STRs are bringing people to our areas, helping our businesses. That increases traffic on our roads. It means we need to do a better job of maintaining everything. And I think it would just overall do a much better job of balancing out the, let's call it the wear and tear on the neighborhood and the environment, and provide the resources we need to keep it maintained as best as possible.
Okay, we have one more question from Scott. Now, I know this is something about, but it's a developing situation.
Okay.
But let's talk about it anyway. So Scott says, how will you deal with the current PFAS contamination of our drinking water?
Mark is right. This is a situation we are learning about in real time, and the punchline answer to this is I don't know. I'm not an expert in this situation yet. Anyway, we're still learning about it. And I don't know if there is a scientific solution where some of these can get filtered out or extracted. I mean, it's a big problem. I know they're in the lake. I mean, I saw the email, and I'm kind of pulling numbers out now, and I'm not an expert, but if Redlands is at 4, Lake Arrowhead is at 25 or 30 or something like that. So we do have a real issue. I think part of this is going to come down to sure the county and official agencies can be involved in the solution. Right now it's I assume just LSD's issue to deal with. Yeah. But because it's a big problem, they're probably going to need more resources. And this is something that as a resident of Sky Forest, we're really familiar with. As far as I'm aware, we don't have a PFAS, but we do have a local water company, a mutual water company that is underinvested, undermaintained. Our infrastructure isn't that great, and we frequently got problems. So the county and the state certainly do have more resources who could be called in to help out. So I think as county supervisor, I'd see hear from myself to facilitate those relationships and make sure everyone is working as closely together as they can to come up to whatever the resolution is. And it sounds like right now, from what I gather, no one knows what the solution is yet. I think it's still a work in progress.
I think as far as we know, we don't even know what the problem is. It's like,
right.
Yeah. From what I've heard, we don't even know where it's coming from. Actually, I overheard a conversation at the brewery the other day. Some people were talking about what does this mean about the fish in the lake. People are allowed to fish. Are they eating that fish? Should we warn them about that?
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know where it's coming from. As far as I'm aware, the government doesn't yet have strict guidelines on what the safe levels are. I think even is in flux. Right. So it's an incredibly complicated situation that's going to involve LACSD. It's going to include the county. It's probably going to include the state. So this is definitely a problem that goes above and beyond and through the county.
Exactly. But I think I go back to that point of when we, and maybe technically speaking, it's not. I think the thing the county can do here is make sure everyone is working together, make sure we have the resources we need from the state, facilitate those relationships to at least make some progress here.
Not a question. Well, it was a question, but it's been answered by someone in the chat. Yes, sorry, Susie. Apologies. Short-term rentals.
Yes.
So Airbnbs, VRBOs, that kind of thing.
So we've got that as a here. If you haven't watched it already, I actually did a pretty deep dive on the county's STR report. To the code enforcement stuff we've been talking about, there's a long-standing complaint here in the mountains and also in a lot of desert communities that the proliferation of STRs has had an impact on the availability of long-term rental housing. And I think this is another example of the county, again, spending money on consultants to just say there's not a problem. I talk in detail about how you can massage the data and massage the messaging to tell the story you want to tell, which from the county's perspective here is that there's not, I think, somewhere in the middle. And I think enough people are upset about this to know that we need to do something about it. So again, keeping revenue here. I am a proponent of finding sensible caps on STRs. And when I say sensible, I think it's really important that we look by neighborhood, because I know we've talked to residents and hey, some communities in Big Bear are almost exclusively STRs, but that's not the case of the entire area. So I think a lot of this come down to discussions with local residents and figuring out what solutions work for each geography. But if you have 10 minutes, give that video a watch, because I go into quite a bit of detail on how I think the county has kind of represented the position a little bit, and how I do think to do something about it.
Yeah, for anyone who wants to any of the long-form YouTube videos, there usually are short versions of them on Facebook and Instagram. But if you go to YouTube, search for that's SMITHOR, S for Sierra, B for Bravo. If you put the at the beginning, you'll definitely find us. That's important.
Okay, so moving on to disaster prep. I don't even think this needs a whole lot of discussion. If you're a mountain resident, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The county has released a different reports at this point. There's a county report, there's a sheriff's report highlighting a bunch of different issues. I think one of the issues we had was just poor communication, because a lot of people were not knowing what was going on. That was the main reason. I think another critique I would give to the county is that it did seem like there was a lot of prioritization on commercial areas over necessarily having all the equipment up here in residential areas. I mean, obviously it was a hugely impactful decision, and unfortunately we suffered some loss here. So really my priority here is making sure that we are as prepared as we possibly can be. And look, I'm certainly of the view that we as mountain residents, we need to do our part to prepare as well. And by and large, I think most people did before Snowmageddon last year. Making sure everyone's on the same page, making sure we've got the resources that we need to manage a situation like this. I've heard a lot of people say, this was a once in 100-year storm and we shouldn't really worry about it anymore. I'm certainly of the view that there's a good chance we're going to see events like this. It might not be exactly the same thing, but events, they do seem to be becoming more common, and I think we just need to be prepared and be ready. So I think we just need to learn from our experience last winter and be ready for the next one. Small business, I kind of touched on this a bit earlier on. Opening a small business particularly in San Bernardino is really difficult. I think it's extremely difficult up here in the mountains. So Mark was even looking at opening down on the corner of Cuffle and 18, and going through so much red tape with the county, had to abandon the whole idea. Some have been trying to open a restaurant again on the 18. They've been in a 3-year. County has cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I think one thing that's become clear is the county really takes this one-size-fits-all approach to regulation. A lot of that is really heavily geared toward life in a city. And obviously we're up here in the mountains, we can't change our geography, and I think we need to find ways the county can make exceptions to some of these rules, and I think we need to find a way to make these exceptions easier to deal with. I don't think it should take you 3 years to open a restaurant. It shouldn't take you, another mountain resident just opened a coffee cart in Cedar, and it was, I think, over a year just to get the permits for a mobile coffee cart. Like this stuff seems easy to me. So I do think we need to find ways to make business easier here and make the county work for us instead of against us. And we touched on this earlier, but representation for unincorporated communities, this is a core driving principle. And we just need all of us in unincorporated San Bernardino on that board of supervisors to stand up for all of us. And that's what I want to do.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. One comment from Vadim about, I think this is about the one of our STR solutions on the website. Solution number 2, limit the number of permits that are issued to a single owner to prevent corporations from buying up multiple properties. His comment is, it seems a little bit pointless because savvy investors will create separate entities. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I know that's probably something that you maybe have a little bit of experience in the financial world of shell corporations and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think ultimately, if you really want to try to find a way around something, then maybe you can. Still need to work through the technical details of how a piece of legislation like that would be written. But to the extent that it's possible to look through who is investing, like, do we have 20 LLCs all owned by the same corporate? If that's the case, then I think we should be saying maybe this isn't a good idea. And the reason I'm so focused on this is this is a problem, I think, in residential real estate across the country. And it's big corporate investors buying up for long-term rentals, short-term rentals. And I think it's going to be a problem for all of us here if we're living on and the other 20 houses, big corporation being rented out for STR purposes. Kind of goes back to the point I was making around the most responsible STR owners are people that live in the local neighborhoods, and I think a lot of that goes away when we are introducing serious corporate ownership. So it's not going to be a perfect solution, but I do want to try to find ways to make sure that this STR solution or this STR situation is working as well for us as it possibly can be.
Yeah, and I would just add 2 points to that, two things that we've already discussed. It may not be a perfect system because, as Vadim points out, savvy investors can create separate entities, but having that rule gives you legal recourse if you find out that people have been, creating and doing all that. So
Exactly.
that's number one. It's not necessarily, not all regulations are going to be completely perfect in achieving their goals, but they do give you legal recourse to catch people, to enforce things. Exactly. And the other thing is that short-term rentals are not a unique feature of life for the mountains, right? You've talked a lot about wanting to look to other towns, see what they've implemented, because this is a problem. Corporate ownership and multiple families owning, say 5, 6, 7 properties, whatever, that is a problem that other people deal with too. So
exactly. And Palm Springs is a good example. They have a very, very similar piece of legislation restricting the number of properties that a single entity can own. So again, I think this comes down to looking to places that have managed it well. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, but these have been a feature of society for a long time now, and there are plenty of places that have a good handle on them. So I think we just need to look at those places, take the best bits that make sense for San Bernardino, and implement them here.
Yeah, I think that's the important part, is we're not just copying policies
Correct.
from other towns. It's looking at what they've done, and sometimes, looking at what not to do.
Exactly.
Is just as important.
Exactly.
I'm not sure if she's still online because she said she's driving home into the mountains and losing signal, but Susie asked, how long have you lived in San Bernardino?
Yeah, so I've lived, full disclosure, we've lived here full-time for about 4 years, but I've had a lifelong connection to San Bernardino and the district. So the living room that I'm talking about this evening, my grandparents built 50 years ago. So I live in a family house that I've been coming to my entire life. We've also got, I'm going to call it a little family campsite down in Lucerne Valley in the desert, also in District 3. So I've had a connection to San Bernardino. And actually, this is probably a good time to move on and talk about me, also because we've got another session in 6 minutes. So I'm going to get through this quick. So I haven't always, and I think one of the things I'm really bringing to this role is some breadth of both professional and life experience. So I grew up outside of LA in a neighborhood called Topanga, also in the mountains, so was used to, as a child, getting evacuated from my house pretty much every year for brush fires. So I'm used to I'm a normal dude. I like to cook, I like to tinker in my workshop. But I lived abroad for years. So I lived, most of my professional investing career actually happened in London. So one thing I think I can credibly say is, a big part of that job was bringing disparate groups of people together, oftentimes across countries. At this point in my career, I've done business in 5 different continents, and I've got a pretty good breadth of experience on how things work in different places. And if I think about part of this job, providing challenge, providing perspective, I think that breadth of experience is actually pretty helpful. So lifelong connection to San Bernardino, but I've been around the block a few times.
Yeah, if anyone has lived here for a long time, you may remember Graham's uncle, Jay, who used to work at Lumber.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Maybe your grandma, who used to live on Wabash?
She didn't get out and about too much.
She wasn't a sociable lady, but
yeah, exactly.
So she's
my uncle used to work at the lumberyard just down in Rim Forest, so we've had a long family connection up here.
And then your grandma moved from Wabash down to Redlands, so
so
Smith family has been
lots of history.
Yeah, totally. We are unfortunately running out of time. There are a couple of extra questions.
Okay,
one from John,
let's get to those.
Okay, we can try and give a quick answer. But if we don't give you a long enough answer, John, I'm talking to you specifically, we will respond either in the comments, or I will find you on Facebook and we'll send you a message with a response.
Or drop us a message on email or online, whatever social platform you're on.
We'll get in touch.
We are available.
Yeah. So the question is, did they document or number what the list of long-term units has been over the last few years in that STR report that you read? No.
So one of the issues in the STR report, and this is something that's detailed in the YouTube video, is that a lot of the data sources that you really need to form a complete view on this are unavailable or incomplete. So one of those is, for instance, is eviction data. And you might or might not be aware of this, but the sheriff's department here was actually hacked, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago. I don't remember the date.
I think it was last year.
Last year. But had to pay money to get the data back. Actually talking to people in the sheriff's department, it sounds like that restoration process isn't even complete yet. So I think it's a little bit crazy for the county to stand behind some of the assertions in this report when they couldn't even get all the data. And that's one of the conclusions I come to in that video. So please give that a watch.
And then we have one final question from Sarah, who says, the county can be reimbursed by the federal government for firefighting on federal land. Do you know if they have taken advantage of this?
I don't know specifically, but this is certainly something that I would look into. I mean, obviously we're dealing with some firefighting issues. I don't have time to get into it now, but everyone's going to see Measure W on the ballot, whether or not we want to keep the FP5 fire protection tax. So I know one thing that's going to be really important going forward is that we are getting as much money from both the state of California and the federal government. Again, this is something that I think I'm pretty qualified to do.
Yeah. And Sarah, just so you know, I know this is not directly about firefighting, but there have been other issues that the county's dealt with, which they were able to get state funding reimbursements for. One in particular was a new piece of state legislation that said ballots need to print the name of supporters and opponents of the ballot, not just information guide. They need to print it on the ballot so that people know who is, financing or supporting or opposing each of these measures. Because that was a state mandate, they were able to request reimbursement from the state. I spoke to several people in the Registrar of Voters department, and they told me that they had not sought reimbursement. So I'm not saying this is the case for the firefighters, but I do know that situations like that, money has potentially. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, lots of thoughts on that one. I actually went to go speak out at the Board of Supervisors meeting where they to remove this ballot information. They did it on the grounds of things without even asking the question in terms of how much money this would save.
They didn't actually
fundamentally a problem here.
Yeah,
but
they
that's a topic for another time.
Figure out how much it was going to cost.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we have unfortunately run out of time.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, if you're still interested, we are rolling straight through into our next session. This is targeted on the desert. A lot of the problems that we face between the mountains and the desert community into this unincorporated San Bernardino County problem. So if you're still interested, feel free to stick around. But we're gonna kick off to that one in a second. My last request is if we on over here my last request is
you're on this slide.
If you are at all interested in anything that we've said tonight, please consider supporting the campaign. This is a completely grassroots campaign. We're not taking any corporate donations. That's been a huge feature of the Board of Supervisors over history, and I'm really focused on maintaining some independence. So there's a QR code here. You can also visit the website, and there's a big donate button there. And the most helpful thing you can do right now, given we're getting so close to ballots dropping, they're going to get mailed on February 5th. On February 5th, is just spread the word. So if everyone on this call can just pick up their phone and tell 5 friends about the campaign, just send them the link to the website. Any word of mouth, just referral here is incredibly important. We're in the stage of we got to get out the vote, get visibility. So please tell your friends and family.
Yeah, we unfortunately have run out of time. Becky had a comment just saying she would love to see access to county services such as TAD office, mini DMV office, and courts on the mountains for those who do not have transportation. I think we're very much in favor of that.
Absolutely. One thing to their credit, we've seen the county do a little bit more of, and I'm really in favor of expanding, is some mobile county services. So maybe a permanent office, but you can have some of these services in town every once in a while. So that's something I think we should certainly look at expanding. But I am on exactly the same page. I don't want to drive all the way down to San Bernardino to do all of our basic services. And believe me, if you're a resident out in the desert, you certainly don't want to drive to San Bernardino for stuff. So yeah, you're preaching to the converted here.
Yeah, we could have a little DMV truck that comes around, plays a tune like an ice cream truck. That would be great. Can you imagine? That would be hilarious.
Okay, I mean, I think we're just going to keep it open and start over, basically. So I'm going to unplug the computer for a second, switch over to the desert presentation. But thank you so much for joining this evening. If you're just tuning in, welcome. We just finished up our mountain town hall. We're moving over to the desert now. Give us just a minute to get ourselves reset here, and then we'll kick right off. Hey everyone, thanks for joining tonight, or thanks for staying on the line if you've just been on our mountain town hall. If you're just joining us now, my name is Graham Smith. I'm running for the Board of Supervisors here in District 3. Thank you so much for taking the time to join. It's really important to me that we connect with as many residents as possible. I'm going to talk a bit more later in the presentation. This is a huge district, a huge place. It's really hard to get out in front of everyone in person all the time, especially in such a condensed time frame here, because we're in a position now where ballots are dropping in less than a week, and the primary is on March 5th. So now we got to just get in front of as many people as we possibly can. So thank you so much for tuning in. A couple of just quick, oh, hold on, I'm getting.
No, sorry, I was just going to introduce myself to everyone who's joined. My name is Mark. I'm Graham's husband and campaign manager. I'm running things behind the scenes, which is why I don't have a camera on me. I wanted to let everyone know, if you're just joining, this is the session for residents in the South Desert, so Morongo Valley, Joshua Tree, 29 Palms, Landers, those areas. If you're still on here from the mountain session and you had a question that you didn't get answered, you can drop it in the chat. The presentation is largely the same, apart from when we get to talk about local issues and obviously questions from residents. But if you don't want to stick around for the whole presentation again, just leave your comment or your question in the chat, and either Graham or I will respond to you directly on either Facebook or YouTube with an answer. So just in case you were hovering and hanging around to get your question answered, you don't necessarily need to, so just pop it in the chat, and we will 100% respond to every single one.
And apologies if it's repetitive, but we're now doing this 4 or 5 times a week, so we're getting.
Brenda actually just, this started at 6. I just logged on and it's ending. Brenda, it is not. We had 2 sessions tonight. We had one to talk directly to residents in the mountains, which was from 5 till 6. That literally just ended, and we're rolling straight through into the desert. We're going to talk about some of the same things, but some very different things, because obviously the problems of people in the desert are very different from problems in the mountains. So if you are a resident, please stick around. It is not ending. We are just getting started.
Yeah. So, and on that very note, it's really important for us that we are talking to residents across the district, because we'll talk about it later. District 3 is huge. I think it's the hardest one in the entire county to manage because it's so diverse. I'm up here in the mountains. We've got residents in the desert. We've got urban areas. It's just geographically large and difficult to manage. So thank you so much for joining tonight. So just housekeeping rules or just notes. One, if you have interested in joining and learning a bit more, drop them a text with a link to join. If they can't join live, all these sessions get recorded and posted both to Facebook and YouTube, so people can always go back and refer later. But yeah, if anyone wants to join, just drop them a text and have them hop on.
I mentioned this is not our only town hall for the desert. We have our next session for residents in Morongo Valley, Yucca Valley, Landers, Joshua Tree, 29 Palms, Homestead Valley, that kind of area. Our next session is going to be on Thursday. from 6 till 7 p.m. So if you know people who might be interested in joining and couldn't make it tonight, don't worry. We're having another one of the sessions in, what is that, 2 weeks? 2.5 weeks?
Yes, and in the meantime, we're always available for questions. I mean, we'll be in Morongo this Saturday, I believe Saturday, Basin Conservation Association meeting. So we will be in town for that. We will also be in Landers in person next Friday for a candidate forum. So we doing these virtually midweek. We spend a lot of time in the desert on the ground. So there are plenty of opportunities to come meet. And certainly if you'd like to find a time to meet separately, please connect with us and we'll do everything we can to make that happen. So there is whatever platform, whether it's Facebook or YouTube, there's a chat window. As we go through, please drop questions in the chat. There's probably a 20-second delay between me talking and actually showing up on your computer or on your phone. So please just drop in questions as we go, and then Mark will stop me and we'll respond at certain points throughout the presentation.
And just on that point, Marsha, if you're still here, this is the live session for the desert. If anyone is having any technical problems, please let us know. Because maybe it's something on our end, maybe it's something on your end. But if you let us know, then I can figure out on our end if it's something here. So, Marsha.
Hey everyone. Okay, so again, this is the southeast desert. So Morongo, Yucca Valley, 29 Palms, Landers, Joshua Tree, all of you. So we've got a presentation that we'll run through. But like I said, at any point, if you've got questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll get to them. So I actually wanted to start this off by talking about what a county supervisor does, because I'm very conscious this is it's not a household name. It's not a commonly known position on the ballot. I will admit to the fact that I didn't even really know what it was until about a year ago when I got super involved here in our local community. So I wanted to take a second to explain just kind of what the roles and responsibilities are, so you have an idea of where I'm coming from and why I think I'm actually pretty good for this job. So kind of think of this in four main buckets. One is approving the budget. So the person sitting in the seat needs to be financially literate. Our county has about a $10 billion annual budget, and we've got dozens of departments that all need funding. So you've got to have a financial mind. Allocating resources. So on those dozens of county departments, they all need resources to operate, whether that's people or money from the county's fund. So the person sitting in this seat has got to have a good view on how to do that. On legislation, a lot of what the county supervisor does, or the board of supervisors rather, is takes legislation that's passed down from either the state of California or the federal government and finds ways to implement it in ways that work for all of us here. We'll talk later about how I think we've job, but part of the role and responsibility here is working in real time, working quickly, and being able to respond to feedback from residents across this huge district. And last but certainly not least is securing investment. So the number one source of financing that we get for our county's budget is through reimbursements from the state of California and the federal government. So the people sitting in these seats need to know how to lobby for resources and get investment for San Bernardino County. They also need to know how to work with the businesses that are here. Because a big part of this job is selling people as in companies, on why they should come to San Bernardino and set up shop. So that's the high level roles and responsibilities. Now I want to take a second to tell you about what my own professional background is, what I used to do, and how that matches up. So I've got two main phases to my professional life. The first one is my career in corporate finance, and the second one is small business. So most of my professional career was spent doing what I'll call, for purposes here, big finance. And what that meant really was I raised and invested money. So I worked for a big company. That company manages about $400 billion. If you've ever had one of the public pension funds from the likes of LA Sarah or SB Sarah or Coopers, you were a person that I've managed money for in my professional career. So my job day to day was going to these big institutional investors, talking to them about why they should give my company money to manage and invest for them, and then taking that money and then spreading it across hundreds of different companies in a huge array of different sectors. And I kind of think about that as very similar to the county allocating its $10 billion budget across all these departments. Professional career, I personally raised and invested about $10 billion, and that was across hundreds of different companies. I tried to make a list of the sectors I invested in the other day. I got to like 40 and I stopped counting. So I was what was called a generalist, which meant I looked at companies in every industry. And at this point in my career, I've done things in, I don't know, healthcare, manufacturing, childcare, technology, software, I mean, agriculture, you name it, I've probably looked at it. Which I think is really helpful when you're looking at a county that's big, pretty diverse, has a lot of companies in it, and has a lot of different departments that all need some kind of resources. And really my specialty was figuring out how to allocate resources across those companies to make sure they worked the best they possibly could. And then I didn't want to do big corporate work for my entire career, so I left that job, and I've spent the last 5 years or so running small businesses. One was an online health and fitness startup. The other was a topical skincare brand. And really what that small business experience gave me was an appreciation for just how hard it is. And especially being a small business owner here in the county is not easy, especially being an unincorporated San Bernardino County like I know a lot of you desert residents are. And I'll talk later on about things I'd like to do on the Board of Supervisors easier for people. So bringing this back to the supervisor, talking about the budget. So again, this county has a $10 billion budget. You've got to be confident dealing with figures of that size. This is something I've absolutely done in my professional career. Talked about allocating resources. Me investing money in all these different companies is a little bit like looking at this county's $10 billion budget and saying, okay, in the dozens of departments that sit within the county, how can we allocate resources as effectively as possible? I also think a big part of that, and something I'll talk about later, is how can we reduce waste and spend our tax dollars more effectively? This is something I really don't think our county has done an amazing job at, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement. The point on improving legislation is this is a fast-paced environment, and we have seen supervisors complain that they don't have enough time between getting something on their desk and having to provide an opinion on it. So I'm used to working in a really fast-paced environment, and I can work on the time scales that we need to here. And last but certainly not least is securing investment. So I talked before about how we get such a huge share of our budget from both the state and federal governments. So the person sitting in this seat needs to know how to lobby for investment, needs to know how to sell San Bernardino County, and needs to be able to do that both with governments and also with private industry to figure out ways to entice them here to improve the economy. And I'll talk in a little bit about how I think that's something we desperately need to do here. So I'll pause for a sec to see if we've got some questions.
We do have a question, and
Okay.
it's a doozy. We're starting off with a big one. Joanne wants to know, can we talk about your position on Cadiz and their air quotes partnership with the Board of Supervisors?
Yeah, so for background, I'm going to assume if you're a resident in the desert, you have some background and some knowledge on the Cadiz water project, but just a really quick primer. This has been a long-standing project / discussion between the county and some private industries to extract some water from some ancient aquifers under the Mojave Desert. And it's been through all kinds of different iterations, and there are a lot of conservationists who have really come out opposing this project for, I think, some pretty materially important reasons. It's both on, there are tribal concerns, there are, environmental concerns in terms of natural habitats, and one of the doozies for me is this goes back to, I'm sure everyone remembers the movie Erin Brockovich. This hexavalent chromium in it, and what we're being told is that if this water is extracted and mixed with other water, then the level of chromium is below the limit that is okay. But the problem is here, we don't even have a legal limit for what hexavalent chromium should be. So I think I'm certainly not in favor of exploring projects like this. I think if you have this many things going against them, I don't see how you can in good conscience say, okay, we should proceed with this. Not certainly not least of which is because we're extracting water from way under the desert in an ancient aquifer. My personal view here is we have way more interesting opportunities to focus on conservation, making better use of what we already have, and I think this is also an example where the Board of Supervisors has really demonstrated more of a commitment to big development than to the preservation of natural landscapes or to protecting residents. So I am personally not in favor of this project. It is still being discussed. The last hiccup that I'm aware of was the fact that the board's main opposition was that the water was going to get extracted and shipped out of the county in San Bernardino County. So they're kind of giving it not the green, but it isn't dead in its tracks yet. But I think this has gone on long enough, and I think it's time just to put an end to this and find some more interesting things to do with this time.
It might be worth talking about, obviously this is a project that's had a really long history. It's wielded, significant political influence as for anyone who's interested. Paul Cook, who is the supervisor for District 1 in the Northern Desert above us, when he was in Congress, was staunchly opposed to the project. And then, a few years went by and all of a sudden he's a big champion of it. Now, obviously the science behind it and, the research and the environmental impact studies, have moved on and changed. But I think one thing that has been consistent about this project is just the methods that they've employed to try and thread this needle, none of which really address the underlying problem of the fact that the water might not be safe. It's disturbing, important tribal lands, and it's going to have a huge impact on the environment. So yeah. I think at this point it's just mired in so much controversy that
I think sometimes when fundamentally if you take a step back and kind of zoom out and say, okay, this has faced so many battles, there are so many obstacles, is this what we should be doing with our time and resources? I think we could find far better, far more interesting ways to spend our county time and resources than trying to push this project through. So I am, from what I know about it, I am personally opposed. I'm certainly, we're still doing all the digging and the research, but a pretty firm opinion and have looked through decades of history, and right now doing this does not feel like the right thing. Okay, any other questions in the chat? Okay. So pushing on, let's just spend a second talking about District 3. District 3 is huge. So San Bernardino County is already the biggest county in the entire country. It's about the size of West Virginia, and District 3 is about half the geography of San Bernardino County. So it's 10,000 square miles. And I think it's the most complicated one in the entire county to manage because geographically it's really unique and it's really diverse. So I'm up here in the mountain part of the district. We're obviously talking to residents in the desert this evening. And even in the mountain regions, one area is not the same as the other, and I know it's the same in the desert. So managing District 3 is a real challenge. So yeah, we've got just some stats here. And the thing I like to talk about is really a one-size-fits-all approach to management does not work here. And I think this is this is one of my big criticisms of the county, which is that they take an approach that's heavily geared toward life in a city to managing life for us here in the mountains or for you in the desert, and I think that's really not too appropriate. So I think that's a good way to segment into some of my countywide priorities. So now I want to talk about what I want to do actually if I'm sitting in this seat. So one thing I want to be really clear with you guys about is I want to tell you exactly what my agenda is on the Board of Supervisors because I don't want there to be any surprises if and when I'm sitting in that seat. I want you to know exactly where I'm coming from, what I believe, and what my agenda is so that if I'm sitting there, you know what to expect. So in terms of countywide priorities, I certainly have more than these four, but I think this is a good place to get us started. One is financial responsibility. It's hard to go a couple weeks in this county without seeing headlines in the news around alleged corruption, financial misconduct. Even just looking, I spend I mean, I have a finance background, so I spent a lot of time looking through our county's budget. The millions of dollars of waste that I've found just looking through this budget is kind of crazy to me. So I really think more financial discipline would not go unnoticed here. You might have seen the news about our former county chief executive officer. He was ostensibly fired, but really allowed to resign. I really think the situation was caught too late. Just for a bit of background, he was bullying employees, having inappropriate relationships, bullying female employees in particular who have taken entire departments with them. And I think part of the problem here is we didn't have anyone sitting in these seats who could identify some of these problems early on. So one of the things that I developed in my finance career is a analytical brain that is trained to look for anomalies and errors. I think if we had more people sitting in these seats who could actually do that effectively, as a county, we'd be way better off. Two, I think we need to diversify our economy. Now, it's kind of interesting. So whenever we do a table event as a campaign, one thing we do is we have this whole series of jars with issues on them and some tokens, and we ask people to vote on what's most important to them. If you're in an incorporated city down from the mountain regions where we are, Redlands and Highlands, something like warehouses comes up a lot. But when we get up to the mountains, it's not necessarily front of mind for people. I think it's really important to recognize what's happened to our broader economy as San Bernardino and to look at just how much investment we've made in the transport and logistics space. Right now, it's far and away our number one sector. It employs over 150,000 people. I mean, this was as of 2021. I don't even have the most up-to-date stat on it. And it's kind of like that old adage of putting all your eggs in one basket. So I think we're setting ourselves up for a potential area of exposure because we have now so much reliance placed on just this one industry. It's going to be a real problem for all of us here in the county when that industry starts to take a dive. And I think there are good reasons to think that it will. I actually have a whole piece of content, a whole video on just this topic. So stay tuned on YouTube because that'll go up in the next couple days. But I do think there's a problem brewing. So one thing I'm really focused on is finding ways to diversify our economy and bring other industries to San Bernardino. One thing I talk about a lot is investing in renewable energy, particularly on land that's been disturbed already, like warehouse roofs. They're already supposed to have renewable energy installations. Most of them don't. I think it's a really easy and a good way to start to bring in some more industries, bring in some more skilled jobs, oftentimes union jobs, and start to diversify our economy. I think our relationship with the state and the federal government here is kind of at an all-time low right now. So I don't know if people are aware, but in 2022, a measure narrowly passed to study seceding from the state of California. It was done as an attempt to try to get us more resources here from California for San Bernardino. It really hasn't worked. So one thing I'm focused on is finding some more productive ways to work with the state of California to really find some more funding for us. Again, the other day I just posted a video about a case study being electric school buses and how we have an opportunity to start electrifying our heavy vehicle fleet here and get some more resources from the state of California to do that. Again, it's just one idea. We don't have enough time to talk about all of them, but I think I'm focused on finding positive ways to engage with the state rather than working against them. And on that note, I want to restore trust between the county and its residents. So if you're like me and you're in an unincorporated part of San Bernardino County, you know what it's like to feel forgotten about by your county government. I mean, a huge part of my reason for running for this seat was my experience in the snowstorms we had last winter, where we literally were forgotten about and weren't hearing anything. But then talking to residents over the last year across the district, we found it's different takes on a similar issue in all these different areas of District 3. So we have a point on the slide here about MAC committees. So if you don't know what that is, it's called a Municipal Advisory Committee. And it's really meant to be a way for a local geography to be a conduit for the local government to really express the concerns and needs of that particular locality. And we have a couple of them up here in the mountains actually, but we understand a lot of the desert ones that used to exist have been disbanded. I'm really focused on expanding that network as much as possible, and also making sure they're really representative of the local population. And we need to make sure that we know what the actual local population wants. And the reason I say that is I know a lot of our Macs here are politically charged, politically motivated, and I'm not even sure we're accomplishing that with the Macs that we have. So yeah, rebuilding trust between the county and its residents, I think, is a big thing we need to focus on.
That is a great time for a question, because we have a question here from David Graphics, who asks, can real community plans be reinstituted instead of the silly, toothless, useless community action guides?
I would certainly like to hope so, and that's certainly something that I'm focused on doing. And look, I went to the Board of Supervisors meeting in December to speak out against I think this is the Flamingo Heights glamping project. I know there are a lot of proposed projects in the desert communities that really aren't in line with either the community action plan or the rural living zones that look, a lot of us live in areas of San Bernardino County for a certain lifestyle and for just really specific reasons. And I want to make sure that county government is doing its role to uphold that promise to residents, because I know I don't want a hotel built right next door. Like, I don't even like that one of the houses in our neighborhood is run as a really commercial Airbnb. We all live in these regions for a specific reason. And preserving the rural character and the uniqueness is really, really important to me. So yes, I think we need to do a better job there.
For anyone who doesn't know, the county has a website. I think if you go to the website countywideplan.com, I think that will get you to it's sort of buried within the massive county website. But there's sort of a few layers to this. So they give a description of the community, then they outline broad aspirations for each community, and then that filters down into the community action guides. And I agree with the comment, which is that a lot of the points in these community action guides are incredibly vague. They don't really. It's a lot of fluff, a lot of political speak. But one thing we've talked about already is the reestablishment and expansion of the MAC networks, and I think that would be a huge component in making these guides like much more real, as the comment says. Okay, so another question from LT in JT. They ask, what do you see as some of the most egregious categories of wasteful spending in the county?
So, kind of group this into a few different buckets. I think the most egregious one that I've found over history is some of the money we've paid out in lawsuits that, by all accounts, would have been avoidable if they were settled early enough or settled properly, and that is well into the hundreds of millions of dollars. So I think when we talk about things like the Measure W or repealing the FP5 fire protection tax, that's what $46 million a year. Putting that in context of a $200 million settlement, I think it kind of makes you all the more upset about extra taxes we have to pay as the end resident when we know there's so much waste happening at the county level. So that's the most egregious category. Then as I look down, the other thing that I think the county has done is looking at our STR issue this is a good for instance. If you haven't watched it yet, I have a whole video on YouTube really analyzing the county's STR report. I talk about this because there have been complaints from both residents here in the mountains and also you in the desert around how STRs are impacting the availability of long-term rental housing. Instead of taking a stand on this issue, the county solution was to pay a set of consultants to basically claim that there's not a problem. Again, there's not enough time to talk about it, but I talk about in that video why I think that actually the conclusion of that report has been managed to be a conclusion the county wants rather than residents. I've spoken about kind of on the STR issue is, I'm really a proponent of keeping STR revenue in the local. If you read through the county's budget, they say we're undertaking an economic initiative where we're spending a few $1 million on a report to evaluate whether we should do things like that. I would like to see the county take a bit more of a stand and passing off responsibility to consultants and spending what is ultimately millions of dollars a year on that stuff. And then the third bucket is the stuff that I can't control yet, but just looking through the county budget and identifying anomalies. So there are plenty of instances, and having had a long career in finance, really doing this day to day, this doesn't necessarily look right. And the thing that I would do sitting on that board is check in with these department heads and say, hey, can you at least tell me what's going on? Because I think we all have heard enough about the way this county is managed to know that there's probably a lot of opportunity to clean things up and stop some wasteful spending. And I think that comes down to having the hard skills. I've done this professionally for a long time, and it's certainly something that you don't learn on the job in this. So hopefully that gives a bit of context to that question.
Yeah, I don't know. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm British. I don't know if this is a phrase that people use in the US, but there's a British phrase which is look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. And I think in a $10 billion budget, there are so many instances where, 100,000 here, 500,000 there, $1 million here. It goes in such a huge pot of money.
Yeah.
And the amount of money that potentially could be saved, through those and finding efficiencies is enormous.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've attended just a normal Board of Supervisors meeting or looked at the agenda, but a huge part of the job is approving contracts and approving plans. And I think it's easy when you're dealing with a county with a $10 billion budget to say, oh, maybe it's $500,000 contract, like that's fine, it doesn't really matter, because what's that in the context of $10 billion? But if you're doing that hundreds of times, that starts to add up to a pretty big number. So yeah, financial all a lot of money, and I think this topic is going to become really important because regardless of what happens with Measure U and FP5, I think people are understanding certain aspects of it, and I think there's a good chance in the next, whether it's if Measure W passes or in the next couple of years, if people try to get this passed again, there's a good chance we're going to have to find that $46 million for the fire department's budget from elsewhere in the county's budget. And I think it's going to take people that understand how to do that to do it well.
Yeah, we had a comment on the community plans. It says community created according to state requirements in the 70s for operated areas in large counties. Our county has outright contempt for community plans and abandoned them years ago. Now, we've had no official word on that being the county's position, but the fact they're written and the fact that website is buried so far in the county's website,
to find. Yeah.
You completely agree with that. And it also does have a sort of slightly old-fashioned feel to it. I'm not surprised that it's it's in line with 70s legislation.
Actually, it's a good point. I mean, you'll find really, in some ways it's kind of a boring point, but you'll find if you spend any time on my website, I have a whole list of priorities, and one of them is as basic as county IT systems, because I don't, to your point of finding that information being a real pain. If any of you have spent time on the county's website looking for specific information, it's not easy.
No.
And I think there's an opportunity to make life. And I mean, not as a related point to this, and this factors into the whole STR report. If you watch that YouTube video, the sheriff's department got hacked last year and had to pay out a bunch of money in a settlement just to get their data back. So I think there's some really boring aspects to this job that don't get talked about that much, that actually would make life better for people if done well. And something like better IT is one of those examples.
Yeah. Well, also we have to remember that for unincorporated residents, the county is essentially our city council. And so that is the first port of call, and yet we still have to suffer administrative nightmare that is engaging directly with that is huge and complicated and has room for improvement. Let's just put it that way.
Indeed. At some point I can get into my whole experience actually running for office for the first time and how many hours on admin that can and should be avoided.
Yeah.
So just one of many examples where we have a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah. Okay. Just to anybody who has put a question and a comment in the chat, I can see that there are lots of them. So we're gonna bash through some. Okay. So
I'll flip over to this side, which has some local headings. Actually, I'll just uncover all the tiles here, and then if you have questions on these topics, then why don't we
let's answer these questions first, and then we'll go to the slides. Cool.
Yeah.
So Michael asks, what do you do as county supervisor to clear barriers for small business? Being unincorporated, we have so much red tape to operate food trucks, rezone property for commercial use, etc.
You are preaching to the. So if you missed it, I talked before about a lot of examples we've seen up here in our local mountain communities of businesses really struggling. So there's just down the road from here, there's a 10-person restaurant that's been trying to open for 3 years and has been caught in so much county red tape they still aren't there. There's a coffee it took over a year to get the permits for. One of the people who's involved owns a big business up here, deals with the county regularly, and even he with his county relationships. So I think there are a few aspects to this. One is the fundamental aspect in specific geographic areas of San Bernardino County. Know what works for people in the cities does not work for us up here in the mountains, and does not work for you in the desert. Things that we've uncovered through both talking to residents who've been trying to do this, and actually Mark was himself at one point, was so are heavily geared toward life in cities. And what can happen, and obviously you have to take this into the context of like building code and whatnot, but what can happen is if you can often get the county to make some exceptions to take into account the character of your area. And one of my fundamental principles here is we have people living in geographically unique parts of District 3. I think there's a good argument to say we need to evaluate ways where we can have building development and business codes for mountain regions, desert regions to be just more reflective of where we actually live. So
yeah,
that's one. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add a clarification there. When we say the development code and the rules are geared around people in cities, we're not just talking about incorporated spaces. We're talking more about the big urban centers like Redlands and Ukaipa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I think we need to do. The second, and this is a softer point and it's harder to fix, but it's something I'm really committed to trying to fix, is I don't know if you face the similar issues in the desert communities, but certainly as residents of the unincorporated mountain community, a lot of the code inspectors who come up and opine on whether a business is ready to open are not members of our community. The problem is there's kind of a mismatch of agendas, I guess, right? Because you have people up here who want a local business open, and then you have a code inspector who doesn't have any tie to your local community, with no real incentive to business open, oftentimes causing problems for people. And the reason I say this is this is a soft skill and it's going to take a lot of time to fix is we've also heard of plenty of reports of toxic behavior in a lot of these county departments. Like that, they had such a horrible code enforcement experience at one point. They had to call the office in San Bernardino, and the guy who picked up said, "Oh, that's my son you're complaining about." And then, long story short, was just another layer of red tape as a punishment. I mean, I'm firmly of the view that the county should be working for residents, trying to make this easier for people. And the overwhelming feeling we have here, at least in unincorporated mountains, San Bernardino County, is that the county is working against you and not for you. And I think it's especially egregious considering we were talking about projects like the Cadiz Water Project, these big infrastructure projects, these big developments that a lot of residents have to go and speak out against. That seems to be the priority of the county, not fostering small businesses that are really important to our local community. Because I think we have to realize we live in rural parts of the county. Small business is the lifeblood of our community, and the county shouldn't be working against us, trying to prevent us we all want. So Mark is going to jump in.
I just want to interrupt very briefly. Sandra, if you're still here, Sandra has said that she's in Joshua Tree, so she doesn't think she votes in District 3. Sandra, yes, you do.
You do.
Yes. Is huge. It's 9,600 square miles, and it definitely includes Joshua Tree, 29 Palms, Yucca Valley, Morongo Valley.
Yes. Just so you know, it goes basically the high-level borders are like the southwest corner is Redlands, Highland, Loma Linda, Grand Terrace, all the way up to Barstow, cutting around Victorville, and then all the way east to the Arizona and Nevada borders. So all the mountain communities, so many of the desert communities. So District 3.
So yeah, and Sandra, if you're still here, stick around because we are talking to you. Yes.
That's what I'm saying. It's too big to manage effectively. I think we have more questions.
Yes, we do. Okay. So there's a lot of comments here, but the point is the same. The general point is why can't county do a better job of maintaining roads? TS has commented. He lives in Joshua Tree, or she, excuse me, and is talking how much money it costs to repair their car because the roads are so badly maintained. They point out that the military base is huge and they have a lot of money. Why can't the federal government pay for the roads? So let's talk about that because this is a topic that doesn't just cover roads. This is a much bigger topic about the county's responsibility and to advocate on behalf of things that aren't directly their responsibility.
Absolutely. So a couple things to talk about here. One is even though I don't live in my absolute empathy and understanding here because we have the exact issues here in the mountain communities. So I know where you're coming from.
Yeah, snow and ice creates a lot of potholes. So
exactly, our roads are constantly under all kinds of states of disaster. One criticism that I think is fair to give of the current county board is when you go and you talk to them about something that is not strictly in their jurisdiction, they're pretty quick to say that's not my problem. That's a state of California problem. That's a Caltrans problem, as a for instance. I personally don't think that the board is doing its job properly if really facilitating and engaging with those agencies to make sure we're working together as effectively as we possibly can. I really don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's fair. So one thing I really want to do is make sure collaboratively with all these agencies to make sure that we are, one, providing the best service we possibly can, and then two, I mean, the thing we have to really understand and realize is if you're a resident in, let's say, a rural part of Joshua Tree, you don't have too much of a voice as one resident, but the county has a lot of negotiating leverage with an agency like Caltrans or with the state of California. And I think this goes right back to reinstating MAC committees, making sure that we are communicating regularly with residents in local geographies. I think we need to be on the same page together to make sure that we're pushing these other agencies to get as many resources as we possibly can. I think that's something, if I'm being totally honest and critical, I think that's something our current board just has really dropped the ball on so far. I think there's a lot of scope for improvement and a lot of ways we can get more resources and make sure that we're taking care of all of us in rural communities. I mean, the other commitment that I'll make to you, I am a resident of unincorporated San Bernardino County, and I know what it's like to feel like the government just does not care about you. A huge part of the reason, I mean, the nexus for my whole campaign, for me running, is I feel like the residents of unincorporated San Bernardino County deserve a champion and a representative on the answers. And even though I live in the mountain communities, I know your problems are different, but they're kind of the same flavor. They kind of relate to just you not having a voice. So one thing I will definitely commit to you is I want to be your champion and your representative for rural and unincorporated San Bernardino County.
Roads is also an interesting topic because it's not just about the convenience of residents, although that should be a high priority. It's things like, trash pickup. Those trucks cause a lot of damage, and that is a public service that the county provides, or people have to pay for.
Yeah.
So, that's another thing. And maybe most importantly is public safety. So
I was just about to get to that.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Board of Supervisors meeting, speaking out against the Flamingo Heights project, there was so much chat about. I don't remember the highway number off the top of my head, but one of the deadliest stretches of highway where there have been, I don't know how many fatalities. The fact that where we haven't installed a traffic light or something to this road to make it safer after all these years, I think is kind of crazy. Like if I were sitting in that seat and someone showed me all those pictures, the first thing I'd do is pick up the phone to Caltrans and say, okay, what can we do about this right now?
Okay, so a little bit of a discussion going on in the chat of YouTube regarding STRs. So the two points being proposed here. David Graphics says Joshua Tree is currently at about 29% housing STRs. Can a cap of about 10% be established? And Brian S. disagrees with this point, saying, I'm looking for a county supervisor that supports short-term rentals. It provides us with jobs, new local business, and increased property values. Yeah. So since you're the candidate, why don't you weigh in and give the people your opinion on this?
I think it's actually kind of helpful to see people talk about both sides of the equation, because I think the important point here as like finding balance. And by the way, we live in a community with STRs that we grapple with on a daily basis as well. And again, I have a whole YouTube video on this, so I really encourage you to watch it if you have an extra 10 minutes. But one thing I say is I agree that especially in tourist areas, STRs are an important factor of the economy here. That for us, they bring people up from LA. We have a bunch of friends provide customers for restaurants and stores and shops and all kinds of stuff. So I think they do form an important part of the local economy. But I think we need to make sure that they don't go totally unchecked. So a couple of things that I talk about: the revenue generated by STRs in the local communities.
I just want to jump in at this point because we have a comment from Loki Cat who says the county takes a transient occupancy tax from STR owners. It all goes into the general fund.
Correct.
What can we do to return this money back to the community? So this is addressing that point.
This is exactly getting to that point. So one thing I've been talking about for months and months now is I'm a huge proponent of keeping both the permit tax from STRs in the local communities. And by the way, that can help out with things like road maintenance, right? I think it's kind of crazy that all that money goes into the general fund and there's no requirement for that to stay in our local. That's a really important point for me. Excuse me. And I don't think that's something that we need to be spending millions of dollars on consultants to evaluate whether or not we should do it. I think we should just do it. So that's something I really want to do. I think having some kind of sensible cap on the number of STRs is also a strong move, because ultimately, I don't think any of us local residents want to live in a neighborhood that has zero actual neighbors whatsoever. It comes down to balance, and I think it's going to be we have to discuss with residents in each one of these communities to figure out what level would make sense for that community. I think this also comes back to the zoning stuff we were talking about, and like a rural living zone. If you have 100% of houses in a community being STRs, you've almost commercially zoned property. And I think we should be respecting the wishes of residents who actually reside in these rural communities. I think in that STR video, I talk a lot about how I think the conclusion the county came to is a little bit founded because they didn't have all the data that they should have had access to. And I talk about this because one of the big complaints about STRs is that they have a big impact on the availability of long-term rental housing. And I know I've talked to residents in the desert who provided plenty of anecdotal evidence to suggest that's the case. We've done the same with residents here in the mountains. We know a lot of people have had to move on the mountain because they can't find long-term rental housing. So I think these are all things to suggest that actually we need some kind of balanced approach. The other thing I talk about is there are places that have managed their STR issue pretty well. Like Palm Springs is a good example of that. Last time I caught up with the local state Senate candidate is a woman named Lisa Middleton. Months ago, and we were talking about STRs and things that they've done to manage their STR problem. And they've got some fairly sensible, fairly strict restrictions, some of them, and in general, it's worked out okay. So I think instead of spending a bunch of money on consultants to really pay them to tell you that we don't have a problem, I think the far more productive use of time and resources is talking to people, talking to leaders in other places who have managed this transition well, and then figuring out which aspects of that legislation make sense to implement for people here in San Bernardino County. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack here for sure. Yep. And I really encourage you to spend 10 minutes and watch that video, because you get a pretty in-depth analysis of both what the county has done and also my take on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason this is such a hotly contested issue is because STRs sort of fall between the cracks of, on the one hand, what am I allowed to do with my own personal property versus what am I allowed to do as ostensibly a business owner?
Exactly.
We've talked already about the regulations around opening a business, and there are definitely elements of owning an STR that are very much like that.
Absolutely.
So I can see why people want to get kind of heated about this. It's obviously a topic that warrants further discussion.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to balance and input from the community, because if the responsibility of local government to listen to that community, and again, back to this, let's not take a one-size-fits-all approach. What works for you in Joshua Tree might not work for us here in the mountains. We need to listen and respond appropriately.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about STRs for the entire time, but this is being discussed a lot in the chat. One aspect that's being mentioned is the increase in property values when STRs are allowed versus not allowed. And I know that is something that they talked about in that report. So do you want to kind of touch on that very briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think
I know a lot of this was mentioned in that video.
Yeah,
if you want to just
and I see it. It's one of those things that kind of goes. It also goes both ways, right? Because as a property owner, if you can retrofit a property and have it be worth more as an STR, there is clearly an incentive for you to do that. But then the flip side to that equation is, if all the properties have been converted to STRs, then perhaps someone who wants to buy that house and live there long term can't afford it anymore. So, again, I think if we have a sensible approach to regulation and find some kind of balance where we say, okay, maybe houses can be STRs, we might start to get a hold of that problem. Because I do think fundamentally we should be trying to create neighborhoods where people want to work and live. And if at some point you are, as a local desert resident, say you want to live and work in Joshua Tree, and you work in a shop there and you're priced out of buying a house, then I think that's something to try to address. So I think it's important we have STRs, but it's also important we have housing for people.
Yeah, this is an issue that we face up the mountain where, I think it was Brian in the comments mentioned, STRs do bring in a lot of business. They do help support local businesses like restaurants and shops and stuff, which is absolutely true. One thing that we've found up the mountain, and I'm sure this is the case in other areas similar to ours, is that the people that work at those businesses can't afford to live in those areas.
Correct.
So we have people who have to travel up the mountain to get to work. And I'm sure it would be the same in the desert, where you have people that staff those restaurants and bars who are having to drive, 40 minutes into town to go to work. So balance to be struck.
Any other STR themes we want to pick up on?
I think we've covered most of the points mentioned, but obviously we're still here, so keep putting comments and questions in the chat. Otherwise, I think we've addressed everything for now. I'm just having a quick look through. Oh no, sorry, Marsha. Marsha has a question.
So, and by the way, if it sounds like there's a decent amount of activity, so if we have missed something, it's not because we're avoiding anything. So if we miss it by accident, please email us, put it back in the chat, and we will 100% get to it.
Yes, I'm trying to corral the comments from Facebook and YouTube, but Marsha, yes, your question. How supervisors to support what 3rd District residents want when, for example, they only see profit from exploiting the tourism community or expense to their district? I had this question flow through. Short-term rental issues and a housing shortage district comes to mind. But yes, I think this brings up a broader point of be one of 5 supervisors.
Yeah.
How do you plan to convince the other 4 to get on board with proposals that benefit us and maybe don't benefit them as much?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that I'll talk about is a lot of what I'm proposing here is not just related to district, but is related to the entire county. And just so you know, a huge aspect of my previous job, was effectively convincing committees of people to vote on something. So it's both a presentation of facts that will benefit the county overall, and then it's also there's a softer side to that as well. But that is, there's a hugely political aspect of my prior career. So actually, this is something that I've spent a lot of time doing. So when it comes to countywide issues, I think the way I really like to operate is I want to be really honest and transparent with everyone, and that includes the other supervisors. The need to diversify our economy. I think there are really good, hard reasons why we need to look at that and why we need to consider it. And I think it's actually a pretty simple presentation of facts. This comes down to making a really compelling case for something and saying, look at the way this other city or this other county has done it. We should be looking to them for inspiration. And I think the same thing can be said for some of these local priorities. Like look at a city like Palm Springs and how it's managed its STR issue. It's generally a pretty thriving community. They've got a great business environment. Their STR community is broadly settled down. I don't think there's a good reason why you wouldn't want for that to be the case here in San Bernardino. Because ultimately, if you have so many residents complaining about something, even if it's not in your district, I don't think you're doing your good job as a steward of the county if you're ignoring residents in another district. Because look, ultimately, I will be representing all of us here in District 3, but voting on things that affect everyone in the county.
Yeah, I think another point to make there is that you're not always going to be able to convince the other supervisors, but one thing I know you're committed to is making the process very open and transparent. So
that's a really good point. So yeah. one thing that I don't think we're seeing enough of from our current board of supervisors, and one thing I'm really committed to doing for you is continuing some form of this discussion where, again, back to this point of I want you to know exactly where I'm coming from so there aren't any surprises when I'm actually sitting on that board. I want to give some context around what I'm thinking, why I'm voting the way I am, so you know exactly where I'm coming from and have an opportunity to interact and let me know what you're thinking. I think this is something, it's not even just a criticism of one of the supervisors. I think it's a problem with the county overall, and I think it's a real area of improvement that we need.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. I don't know if anyone in the chat has ever attended a Board of Supervisors meeting, but the way they do it is what's called a consent calendar. So they put, sometimes up to like 100 items on a calendar, which there's no debate in the actual meeting. They don't discuss the reasons why they might vote a certain way. They just vote, and it's very often the case that we never find why they voted the way they voted, which I understand for the reason, for time and logistics and stuff. It's not always possible to talk about every single thing, but I do feel like if you're well connected to residents through MAC committees and just being out with people, you'll understand the items on that agenda that people want to know more about.
Yeah. The point here is, again, if you've attended a few Board of Supervisors meetings, you will notice they vote as a block on pretty much everything. Time I've seen in recent history, not all vote unanimously was on the Flamingo Heights, pretty much 5-0 on everything.
Yeah.
I think one thing I'm really committed to doing for you is being really, really independent. And I can talk for a long time around how some of the big developers and big corporates are financing a lot of the Board of Supervisors campaigns. But one thing that's really important to me is I maintain some independence so that if I want to be the one voice of dissent, I'm free to do that. And the other thing I'll do is I'll tell you why. Because if it's a hugely important point where I think our board is financial incentive, then I think we should all talk about it.
Yeah.
And even though I might be just one vote on that committee, I think by being really open and transparent with you, the voter, that's how we get other people talking about it, and that's how we bring some more change to this county. So I'm also do everything, but I do think having one person who's willing to do that is a huge.
We have a comment from Neva, that just says, please note, not everybody wants paved roads. Maybe enough asphalt. I think the point to make here, because there was another comment from T who had made the original comment about, damage to their car, is, are you going to pay for my suspension and my tires? Obviously, there's a balance that needs to be struck between the road needs to be asphalt, but it does need to be maintained well enough that it's not causing damage. And maybe that means that, the county just has to come and upgrade the road more regularly. But I think it's in everybody's best interest to have safe, non-damage causing, well-maintained roads.
Yes,
whether that's
in whatever form they take, whether those are dirt or gravel roads, whatever. I think this also comes back to we need to be listening to and see what they want. I understand wanting the rural character and not wanting to have the road paved. Believe me.
Yeah. We have a comment from David who says, just an the county, Yucca Valley, and 29 Palms were against Joshua Tree National Park in 1994 and the 1994 Desert Protection Act. Only Joshua Tree was for it. Interesting. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
But this kind of touches on a conversation we were having with somebody in the desert about, now that we have this national park, could be a huge draw for tourism, but in their opinion, this person thought that we didn't necessarily have the infrastructure to support that kind of, that kind of level of tourism that maybe some of the other national parks do have. So I don't know if you want to talk briefly on that, or if anyone in the anyone in the chat has a on that. Should we invest more in infrastructure to make Joshua Tree National Park more of a thing? Or is that not what people want?
I'm really curious to hear what people have to say on this, by the way. I mean, I've been visiting Joshua Tree since I was a kid. That's where I learned to rock climb with my dad, and I absolutely love it. And I also understand that the population of Joshua Tree has exploded in the last decade or so. And I'm really curious to hear from people as to where are you feeling that balance sits right now? Is it too many people already? Do you want more people? Would you be supportive of some more, would you be supportive of a commercial development in the right area to support more people into the park? This is where I want to hear from you, and I want to know what residents actually want.
Yeah, David followed up with a comment saying Dawn Rao, our current supervisor, for anyone who might not know, was fully against the Western Joshua Tree petition as 3rd District Supervisor. She was representing real estate developers, no one else. She wasn't representing her constituents. This is public knowledge, because all of the financial filings of every candidate are publicly available. You can see that she does get a lot of support from property developers. There's nothing wrong with that, but it does seem as though she has close ties with property developers, and so David, your comment might be right on the money there.
Another thing I'll say about attending previous Board of Supervisors meetings, in addition to voting as a block on so many things, it's also pretty uncommon to attend a meeting where one of them doesn't have to excuse themselves from voting on a particular issue because they've taken a donation from the the contract that they're voting on.
Yeah.
Again, this comes back to me. I really want to be independent here. I want to represent not the corporations of the district. Of course, it's always my good time to get in a little shout out. If you are at all interested in what I have to say, please consider supporting the campaign. It's completely grassroots. We're not taking any corporate donations, and running a campaign, even in a local area like this, is really expensive. This is a huge area. There's so much reach out we need to do, and that all costs money. So please consider it. There's a link on the website, smithforsb.com. So yeah, a little donation ask.
Well, kind of on that topic, Marsha has another question. With the issues, do you worry about convincing urban constituents to vote for you, as they are the majority by definition?
The thing, so we're doing versions of this presentation targeted at people in all these different communities, right? Because one thing that I'm really cognizant of is the fact that this district in particular is so diverse. So we have a version of this presentation focused on. I mean, I personally spend a lot of my time now down in Redlands, Highland, and Loma Linda talking to people. And I think one thing that I really bring to the table here is, even though I'm a resident of County, I've lived in Los Angeles. I spent, we can get on to the about me, but I know we're already past time. It doesn't. We have time, so whatever works for you.
We can keep going. There are more questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
By the way, if anyone's worried that we're not going to get to a question, we are going to continue until all of these questions have been answered. So,
yes,
but we're mindful of your time, so we'll try and get to them quickly.
Maybe you should we're supposed to meet someone for dinner at 7:30 just down the road.
We'll be fine. We'll be fine.
So one thing. Let me tell you about me real quick. So I think this is an important point. So
we have a lot of questions to get through.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
maybe let's just address people's.
All right. So what I want you to know is, even though I live here in rural District 3, I've lived in LA. Most of my professional career actually happened in Los Angeles, so I know what it's like to live in a city. When I talk to people in places like Redlands and Highland about things like the proliferation of warehouses, as for instance, pretty well versed in a lot of the issues faced by urban residents. And I think we have the same dynamics in terms of the funding for the current board members, being from some actors that maybe necessarily don't have the best interest of the constituents in mind. So yes, we're talking about rural issues tonight. We're talking about desert issues. There is, to me anyway.
Yes, and just to reiterate, in case you have friends or family who do live in the urban areas of District 3, sessions is focused on a particular geography.
Correct.
So tomorrow night, as an example, we are talking to just residents of Redlands, Mentone, and Highland. So
yes,
we are speaking to people. It kind of comes back to the point Graham was making before about this district in particular cannot get away with a one-fits-all approach. The problems, the issues, the geographies, the people, everything is way too diverse. So I think it's obviously much easier to treat everyone the same, but it's also way less effective. And that is Graham is very much up for, and actually ties in nicely to another question from Loki Cat, who says Dawn Rao has failed to. Will you reinstitute?
And if you just joined recently, I think I talked about this in this presentation, or maybe it was in the last one because we ran two back to back. But yes, this is something I'm really committed to reestablishing, and not just reestablishing in their current form, to make them more effective. So we actually have a couple MACs here in the mountain regions. I would argue they're quite politically charged because the representatives are handpicked by the Board of Supervisors. I personally didn't even know we had MACs until I got really politically involved because they're not connected to the community. I not only want to create them, I want to make sure that they are really representative of the communities and actually information to the Board of Supervisors. So yes.
Yeah, we're not going to name names, but we have spoken to representatives on some of the new MACs that still exist, and they seem to have it confused that their job is to be the mouthpiece of to the community rather than the other way around. And something that Graham has talked extensively about fixing.
Indeed. Okay,
I want to get through some of these other questions. Neva, could you address the light trespass ordinance and how the dark night sky is destroyed with unreasonable invasive lighting? So many protections are in violation and it continues to get worse. A couple of extra points. It's a conservation issue. Our dark night skies are disappearing at an alarming rate. The national park is a dark sky park, which is an important designation that could be revoked. Now, I know this is something that we feel very strongly about because where we live, it is extremely dark. Love it that way.
and we love it. But by all accounts, still nowhere near as dark as we have the Valley of San Bernardino right there shining light up here. So
Correct.
Believe me, I get this. I'm actually not going to say I'm an expert at what is currently required or allowed in the current regime, but I'm going to go back to fundamentally as a resident of rural San Bernardino County, we all live here for specific reasons, and I know people want to live in the desert for peace and quiet, dark skies, looking up at the stars. And this is something we need to as much as possible.
Yes.
So even though I don't necessarily have specific answers. It's not. fundamentally, I'm totally with you on this.
Yeah, this also kind of loops back into David Graphic's comments about the community action plans. Light pollution definitely feels like something that should have, a real plan, real teeth to it, because
Agreed.
It's a huge factor in why we all live where we live. So, great question. Still, let me just excuse the delay. I'm just reading through the comments.
Sounds like we had some good activity tonight. I don't have any of the comments here. This computer isn't even connected to the internet. So.
LT has made the comment that the park has a huge maintenance backlog, and it's going to be a while before they even catch up with the needs that they have that have grown with the current park growth. I mean, this all kind of comes back to a resources issue, right?
It comes back to resources. It comes back to working together with other agencies, because I know this is not necessarily a county thing, but the county obviously has relationships with other agencies that it can lean on. So yeah, come back to, like, we need to get as many resources as we possibly can and allocate them efficiently.
I want to scan carefully and just make sure that we've covered everything. David Fick points out in 1988 to 2012, the Joshua Tree MAC represented the Joshua Tree community. I mean, I think at one time these committees worked.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think it's baffling that, and I haven't spoken with Supervisor Rao about this. And by the way, we have a positive professional relationship. I don't have a problem with her personally, and so I haven't spoken with her about this. But I do think it feels fundamentally like a crazy move to start pulling MAC committees out of a district this big. I mean, 10,000 square miles, it's hard to put what 10,000 square miles is into context just from a number, but if you look at this county on a map, I mean, just knowing that it takes 4 hours to drive from where we are to the border, I mean, Needles is in the district.
And that's not even the furthest distance you could drive.
Right, it's like, it's so big.
Yeah.
The fact that we have disbanded these, I think is totally crazy. So you have a commitment that we will expand and reestablish as many of these as we possibly can, because quite frankly, I think it's the only way to be able to manage a county this size effectively. Like this, if I think we should split this district into more. I mean, we're dealing with the situation we got. So you got my commitment that I'll do as good a job I possibly can to make sure we're all properly represented.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the way I view it, and I know this is the way you view it too, if your priority as a supervisor is to best serve the people of the county, it almost kind of makes your job easier to have more MACs with more communication.
Yeah.
Like that's helpful. So it does kind of seem crazy that, the network has sort of withered over the last few years.
Yeah.
I'm not making any, suggestions as to why that might have happened, but I just know that you, as someone who is basically purely doing this to help people and make this county as good as it can be, like, I know you're quite excited to reestablish these MACs because
I want to learn what the problems are in all the places in this district. I'm not gonna claim like I know them right now. And by the way, if anybody does, they are lying to you. This place is so big, it's impossible to know exactly what's going on in every place.
Yeah.
So my commitment to you is I want to establish the network we need to make sure that we're able to serve residents effectively. Because back to Mark's point, that's what the government should be here to do, to provide service to residents, not the other way around.
Okay, I think I've covered all of our questions, but I do just want to make one other comment. This has been such a great meeting. There have been great discussions in the chat, opposing opinions. Graham can't see this, I can.
This is what we want.
People, it's actually kind of beautiful. There are people who've been on opposite sides of a particular issue, but have come together on a different one, whether it's, road maintenance. We had two different opinions, but they both came together to agree on, wanting dark skies. And this is what local government should be. This is excellent. So
fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for being so engaged this evening. Again, we're gonna do more of these. Please make sure you spread the word with anyone else you think is interested.
Let me put the last slide up. So
yeah. That's a good idea. I mean, I think we've for running and everything. because we need to take a better job. We need to do a better job.
On the last slide with the.
I just put it up.
There we go.
So my ask to you tonight is twofold. One, I already made the donation ask, of course, but also if there are other people in your network who you think are going to be interested in a campaign like this, please just help spread the word. So we've got a tight timetable now. So ballots are dropping on February 5th, and that's when early voting starts, and then the primary. And we're doing a great job getting the word out through virtual and all the in-person stuff we do as well. But if everyone on this call can just think of 5 friends and drop them a text with a link to the website, that is some of the most helpful thing that you can do right now to help the campaign. I really want, one thing I'm really focused on doing as part of this whole campaign is making sure you have a view into who I am as a person, how I think, and what kind of leader I'm going to be if elected to this position. That's something I've really tried to do with all the social media platforms. So if you spend YouTube or Instagram or TikTok, you'll see different versions of all the same stuff, which really get to that point of telling you what I think on all these kind of issues. I really believe we're the only campaign in this race who's doing that, or certainly doing it effectively. So please, if any of this sounds interesting to you, just please help spread the word.
Yes. Also, do you want to just remind people about the events that we're going to be attending?
Yes. So, okay. Region, we will be there on Saturday morning. I don't have my calendar in front of me. We'll be at the Morongo Basin Conservation Association meeting on Saturday. We will be back in Landers next Friday for a candidate forum.
That's Friday the 9th.
That's Friday the 9th, I believe. I believe that's at 4 p.m.
Yes.
And beyond that, we've been living in a time warp, so I don't have my calendar in front of me, but we will stay tuned on social media, because that's where we mention all of our various events and where we're going to be.
Or just the website if you're not a social media person.
Exactly. But certainly this Saturday we will be in Morongo, and next Friday we will be.
Yes. And if you enjoyed today, if you got something out of it, please let your friends and family know that the next session for the desert is going to be on Thursday, February 15th. It on the website and on social media nearer the time. But if you saw the flyer for today, or if you received one of our text messages, feel free to pass that information along to people as well. We really, like Graham says, our goal here is to give you information about Graham as a candidate, what his priorities are, so that you can make an informed decision when you have your ballot.